Um,
Okay, so
yeah,
what about Antidote? Did you manage to work a bit on it?
I have, yes.
Good.
Um, and let's see, there's a few things that I could show. Um, but let's go through some of the stuff that's on uh, let's go through some of the stuff that's on the agenda first. That way we can cover that, at least for the recording. And then when we get to the Antidote core update, I can maybe share some specifics with you that you might find interesting because I did make some progress on those things. Um, so the first thing is a new stats page. So this is something Lisa asked me to look into, and I figured out a way I wanted to do it. There was a few things that I could do. So we collect stats on usage and things like that through Grafana or through InfluxDB. We actually export from Antidote to InfluxDB, and then we visualize that through Grafana. I have a sort of a dashboard of my own that I look at. But obviously, that's sort of a separate thing, and it's not as easy to find that, and it's it's just a whole thing. Um, and so what we ended up doing was exporting stats also to a spreadsheet, which I showed last week, a Google Docs spreadsheet, and that works. But the problem is not everybody has access to that. So what Lisa asked me to look into was basically making a new page on the site that embeds these stats so that it's easy to find. And so that's what I did. So if you go to community, um, this is the page, community/stats. If you want to get there, you can click on community and then you go here to NRE Labs statistics, or you can go to the bottom. I think it adds it to, yeah, yeah. You can click on this if you want. It looks like I need to add some featured images for those. But yeah, if you click on that, and the way these are configured is they show data that's been accumulated over the last 7 trailing days. That's sort of the view that I usually look at. So basically, this is lessons launched in the past 7 days, and that's 7 days, literally like 7 days from today, not like last week, not Sunday to Saturday. It's literally 7 days from today. And lesson start time. That's another metric that we're kind of that's pretty important because it's a nice metric being able to start lessons that quickly. So anyway, that's being shared now. If you feel like you want to see something else, maybe we're gathering it, maybe not, but let me know and I'll see about adding it. We have a few other things we could add, but more than likely that will require some augmentation to Antidote. So we'll see.
Sweet.
Update on SEO improvements. So just a quick update on that. If you go to NRE Labs, if you Google NRE Labs, you can see, looks like not much has changed since last week, but that's good because right now it's showing up. So we don't want a huge change. I think the big thing that I wanted to do was just show that the search results were coming in. Yeah. So things are progressing. That's right. Last week I showed that there were these 43 errors. I don't remember what those came from. Open report. Yeah, I think these were indexed like the day I made the change. Okay. Yeah, there's all these sub pages that were marked no index, and apparently the last time that they were indexed was the day I made the change, which was March 4th. So I just missed it, and I asked Google to re-index. So we'll see. It says it started to revalidate those. So we'll see how those go. Okay, so let's kill that.
So speaking of SEO,
Yeah.
if, and I wish there will be, there's an antidote for COVID-19, you'll probably get overwhelmed by
Oh
much
yeah.
false positive stuff. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Hopefully, I did the right thing and I promoted the right keywords instead of going crazy. I didn't. I'm not going to try to take advantage of that. I'll be happy to let people find other websites in my stead.
Sure.
Okay, user survey. So Lisa couldn't make the meeting this morning, but basically what she and I have been discussing in the last week is uh, let's basically wait for a little bit on the survey. The engagement that we got that we're likely to get is going to be low. So we're probably going to wait at least a few weeks on launching that. But I can tell you the draft is done. She even sent me a SurveyMonkey link. So as soon as this all kind of dies down or gets a little bit better, we'll probably consider sending that back out. So we'll see. And then curriculum V112, we are the current target date for that is the 1st of April, and we're still go for that. What is that? In about a week almost, yeah. So that'll include the new stage on Git. So sort of just continuing that series. Really not much to talk about there. I think I'll also do a Labs and Latte video on that. But yeah, sort of just a regular update there. Nothing too dramatic. The big thing for me, the thing that's been taking a lot of my time is the Antidote core rewrite. And yeah, let's take a second to give an update on that. So let me go to the PR that I've been working on. So I showed, let's see, the last meeting that you were in, Olivier, I had the ability to show effectively using this tool to insert state to replace syringe demock. So that's kind of cool. I haven't done much with that since then, but that's still there. So yeah, if you wanna take a peek at that again, we can. But that's basically the same as last time.
Okay.
All of the old sort of data models for doing things within Antidote have been sort of revamped and simplified. So the code is going to be a lot easier to follow and a lot simpler. There were a lot of abstractions that I had in the code base that I wrote when it was basically when I was first working on this thing. And I had the idea that those things would be useful. Some of which became useful, but others didn't. So there was basically a bunch of like ideas to try in the code base in terms of abstractions, and they were all sort of stitched together in very haphazard ways. And that's kind of the nature of a proof of concept, right? And that's really what it was built to be at first, was a proof of concept. And so what I wanted to do was revisit that and get rid of all the stuff that now we know we don't need, and sort of highlight and reinforce the things that we know we do need. That makes a lot more sense if you've been sort of familiar with the code base, but if not, just suffice it to say that the whole goal for that is making it way easier to maintain and understand. And I think I've done a pretty good job at pushing in that direction. A lot of this is just sort of details of doing all of that. I added open tracing instrumentation yesterday. I had a pull request previously to do this, but that was more of like I was just playing around with it, and like experimenting. This time I kind of knew what I wanted and what I was doing, so I just went through and implemented it. And it turns out that it's actually pretty straightforward to do. And I have now this isn't finished, but I do have traces being exported from Antidote. So if you have an instance of Antidote that's running, you can use something like Jaeger to see the flow of basically the workflow of a provisioning request. So if you send an API request into Antidote to say, start me a lesson, what are the different things that Antidote does and how long does each step take? And of course, within each, you get detailed like event logging and all that kind of stuff. So I'm planning on replacing the vast majority of the logging that's currently in Antidote, because that's kind of what that logging currently is supposed to be. It's supposed to be effectively a way for an operator to know what certain things have happened with certain lessons. And if you have pretty much any more than a single lesson running at any given time, it becomes very difficult to figure out who's doing what. The cool thing about these traces is everything is stored with sort of high cardinality data, and so you can drill down into things like, oh, well, I just want to get traces from this session ID, for instance, UT3C65 blah blah blah. or this source IP, which localhost obviously, but in the real world, it would be a useful IP, things like that.
Could this be used to get some traces from um the lesson tools? Like, as a professor, I want to get an idea of what students would be performing inside the lab. So would there be a way to monitor activity there?
Yeah, I mean, indirectly, sure. What I'm hoping this does is this provides a fundamental sort of like a foundation for just activity and to be honest, like we might not even need InfluxDB at this point because this kind of shows startup times and which lessons are being used and by who and all that kind of stuff. My goal is that this tracing substrate becomes sort of the way that we get data about um, how the system is performing. And so certainly if we do have if we have sufficient data, we could build something on top that basically says, look, let's see who's used which lessons and for how long, and let's see if they bothered going between stages like that. That's the kind of data that you're going to be able to get out of this, because you can do things like um, it's basically say like, give me all of the traces with antidote session ID equals this, and you can make sure that a certain session ID is associated with a user, for instance, and then you can index, you could query this system and say, show me all the traces from that, and that way you can see, everything that session has done. We could, like I said, though, we could also build tooling on top of this. I mean, Jaeger has an API. If we wanted to, we could build a simpler tool on top of Jaeger and say, like, make it much easier to see specific pieces of data. My goal here isn't to be super opinionated on that. My goal is actually just to get as much data as possible, because that's kind of what Jaeger is designed to do. It's designed to be sent sort of all the traces you can fathom and then query after the fact. It's sort of like an external database.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this. One of the things, this is one of the things I've wanted to do for a long time, because I'm also operating the NRE Labs site, and it's been very, very difficult for me to understand if there are problems, specifically if, like, say, like we've had some issues with the VQFX image in the past, and so sometimes a lesson just won't start. But the problem is I don't know that, because I won't know that that's happened unless I go back and grep the logs for like a specific error message. Um, it doesn't tell me trend. It doesn't tell me like what percentage of people are having that issue. It doesn't tell me which specific people are having that issue. Like if somebody showed up and told me today, hey, I had an issue with NRE Labs, I wouldn't even begin to know how to deal with that, because their session ID is gone. They don't know their session ID. I don't have tools for them giving it to me. And also, even if I did have that, there's nothing I could do about it, because again, I'd have to grep through a bunch of logs, and it's very difficult to do that. This makes it a lot easier. So I'm going to be coupling this with, hopefully, I don't know about in the next Antidote release, but perhaps in the one after that, a sort of a dialog box that you can click to get help. And what it'll do is it'll allow you to basically describe what you're seeing, what's going wrong, and it'll go somewhere to some queue, and it'll send along with that message. It'll send all of the relevant information, like the session ID and the live lesson ID and all that stuff, to let me or whoever's adminning the instance turn around and go into this dashboard and drill into details to see what happened. So I'm really excited about this. This has been something I've wanted to do for a while. That's the one other thing I wanted to show. So that's sort of the Syringe D set of things. Oh man, I keep saying it. So Syringe is no more. As I mentioned in MP1, Syringe is going away in terms of a name. We're just going to call it Antidote. So if you hear me say Syringe D again, call me out. One more thing I wanted to show with the Antidote rewrite. So that was more on the server side of things. If you go to the my PR, you'll see that there are 3 binaries now. There's anti-CTL, which is the sort of the admin tool that I showed you a few weeks ago, where we sort of manually inserted some live lessons for testing. So that's still there. Antidote D is the one I just showed. Well, it's basically the server. It's the thing that powers the whole thing. It's the replacement for Syringe D. And then Antidote, which is kind of a new tool. So Antidote is sort of like now the user-facing tool. This is what I'm trying to do is get make this put more functionality into this tool and make it more useful for users, for actual like lesson contributors. And one of the ways that I've been doing this thus far is in the previous version where we had SYRCTL, you had the validate command, which allowed you to validate a curriculum. So I've moved that command into Antidote. So now it's Antidote validate, and it functions mostly the same way. Basically validates a curriculum, and it lets you know if there are any problems. But what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be adding on to that in terms of functionality. I'm going to be adding more tools into that command so that you can do more with it. One of those is creation wizards. So if you run antidote-h, you can see that there's a few subcommands, and I'm going to be adding more. But basically, you've got the validate command, and now you have a lesson command. If you do antidote validate, antidote lesson create, you are entering this interactive wizard. Now, I've shown something similar to this before, but I've made a lot of significant changes since then. So the interactivity might not be new, but I found a library to do the wizard part, and it takes a lot of this the complexity of showing like help output and all of that stuff, and showing a variety of options totally off my plate. So I think it'll make a much better experience. The way I did this, by the way, I kind of covered this previously, but I don't know how much detail I went into. If you look at the new database or DB package, and you go to the models, and we'll look at lesson, for instance, all of the types within Antidote have been decorated with this JSON schema data. So for instance, name is the field that we're going over now. It has a minimum length of 1, which basically means it's a required field, and it has a description. There are other fields like category, for instance, that have both a minimum length and a description, but also they have an enum at the end, so you can specify in the code what values are suitable for this. If you wanted to use something like a description, you could, or if you wanted to use a regular expression pattern, you could do that. So there's all kinds of validation options for these fields. Now, the user, of course, doesn't have to deal with any of that. What they see is just a simple wizard that iterates over these fields. And if you wanted to get help, you can hit a question mark, and it gives you a lot of that data here on the command line. So it tells you that it's required. It tells you the type of data that it is, a string, and then it outputs the description for you. And so you say, let's say, introduction to food bar. Slug. This is another big change in this version. So there's no lesson IDs. So when you are creating a new lesson, you're no longer required to randomly pick some number that may or may not be accurate or unique. Rather, we're moving to a model similar to what you might see in like a website or like a blog system, where you type the blog title, and then the URL is basically a sort of a version of that's called a slug. So I'm literally borrowing that model. In this case, I'm not automatically generating the slug like some of those blog sites do. I probably could, but for now I'm not. Maybe I'll add it to suggest a slug for you. That way it makes it even that much easier, but I haven't done that yet, so we'll see. But similar, that has its own options. You can see required, string, pattern, description, that kind of thing. So foo bar. This is sort of a hyphen delimited kind of thing. And then of course the category. This is an enum, but the cool thing, like I said, this is one of the cool things about the library that I chose. It knows the options, and so it actually gives you a scrollable option pane here, which is pretty cool. So, and I think that's pretty much it for now. Yeah. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but yeah.
I guess these decorations are probably also linked to stuff like OpenAPI.
Yeah, so well, kind of. So the one of the changes. This is actually not an API-driven exercise. This is entirely local. So this command line client doesn't actually interact with the syringe or the Antidote D API at all. It's just a local.
Sure. I mean, but is there any way that those metadata and stuff are interlinked to the web API, to the REST API?
It is in the sense that it is translated to the protobuf types, and so basically one of the
Yeah.
things that was one of the things that was done in the in one of the things I'm doing in this effort is I'm decoupling the internal types that are used for things like this from the API. So previously, the API was basically the data models that were in the API. That was the only thing that we had, and that was simpler to a degree, but it made it very difficult um, to change the internal data models without wrecking the API. Um, and also, it made it so that we had to publish way more into the API than we needed because we needed to use those models for internal use. And so, one of the things that this effort does is it takes it basically establishes a totally new set of types that are in this package, this DB package, and it uses those internally. And then the API, when you request a live lesson, for instance, or let's just stick with lessons. When you request a lesson, for instance, um, there are functions in the API that translate from the database types to the corresponding protobuf driven API types. And so they're very similar, but they're not exactly the same.
I see. So in the end, all this will be documented for potential contributors to understand and help on the code.
Yes, yeah. I think that's honestly a lot of pretty much everything I'm doing is aimed at that. Is aimed at making it more straightforward to follow. It was even the nature of the project thus far is in terms of a proof of concept phase has been very difficult to spend time documenting because I knew that it was going to change. Like a lot of this stuff I knew was not sort of built as a with all of these lessons learned, and so I knew that it was going to eventually evolve. So yeah, I think a lot of these changes are and have been for some time aimed at making contribution easier, either to the curriculum or to Antidote itself, and in many cases both.
Nice in any case.
So yeah, but this tool in general, this tool specifically just works with the local file system. So it's pre-compiled, so it has all of this type information built into it. And so when you say Antidote lesson create, it's designed to just go through the stuff that it already has, built into the code, and then export to a local file system. So it's like a creation wizard that's local. It doesn't interact with an API of any kind. It's just designed to make it easier to create a new lesson on your local file system. I had something else I wanted to say, but I forgot what it was.
In the PR?
Oh, no. The JSON schema document. So if you did want to do something else with this, all of the information that we're using to drive this wizard is stored in, I lost it. Where is it? Here we go. All of the metadata for how we're doing this in the wizard is stored in these tags, and you can export a JSON schema document very easily. In fact, that's what we're doing in the code. So if you go to Antidote, the command line client, and you go to the lesson create wizard, the first thing we're doing is we're effectively pulling the schema document out of that type. So we create a new instance of a lesson, a blank one, nothing's in it, and then we create a schema document that we derive directly from that type. And so if you wanted to do something totally delayed, and then we feed that into the wizard, but you could do something totally differently. Like if you wanted to use this code base and say, look, I want to do something else on top, perhaps maybe a web UI that does the same thing. JSON schema is very portable. That's one of the reasons I'm using it. It's very portable. There's nothing specific to Go that you need to know to use it. So you can use the same data and export the schema document for this type using the same method that I'm using here, and then do something else with it. JSON schema is very portable, and I really like that aspect of it.
Nice.
I mean, shoot, I could probably even add a subcommand to anti-CTL to do the same thing. Where you could basically say, like, literally print me the JSON schema document for this type to the to the terminal. So we'll see. It's all possible. My goal isn't to be super opinionated on what people do with these things. It's to sort of rebase the environment, right? Provide a better foundation that is truly more extensible and more easier to a sort of more simple and more easy to understand. That's my main goal. Once that's done, I think there's a lot of cool things we can do with it. It's just been really tough to do those things thus far because the code base has been kind of interwoven in weird ways and built using sort of tools that people don't always understand. Like for instance, the validation that we were doing previously was done through protobufs, and not everybody knows how protobufs work. And it was using a tool from Lyft of all things to do that. I mean, they do good work, so I'm not saying anything about them, but I'm just saying like not everybody knows those tools, and so it's just JSON schema is a lot more well understood, I think. Anyway, I've been talking for a long time. I will stop sharing and let's see.
I had maybe a comment on the rewrite. I'm not clear on all the proposals that were made and all the potential priorities. Just to tell you that I have a student, if you remember, that is working on trying to merge somehow Eclipse Che, Eclipse Theia, and Antidote. So she's currently struggling with testing Eclipse Che because it's a bit like Antidote. It's based on Kubernetes, and it's starting lots of services and stuff to manage workspaces for developers that will be working on projects and so on. And one thing we have noticed, and which is not clearly operational yet for her, are private volumes, stuff like that, that will save the developers' environments between sessions.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that such a feature could be useful in the context, of course, of my interest, which is providing a platform for labs for students, where a student would work, disconnect, reconnect, and would like to save her documents, her progress, her workspace. So that's why somehow I think that there could be some value in understanding how Eclipse Che is working, and which differences in architecture we have, and maybe if we can reuse part of Eclipse Che for Antidote.
Yeah.
Or port Antidote onto Eclipse Che. It depends on what's more feasible.
Yeah.
Have you thought about those private volume, persistent information, stuff like that?
No, I mean, I don't know about private volumes, but in general, Kubernetes volumes, it basically one of the things I think there might have been a proposal for doing something like a scratch directory, which might solve that problem. But right now, yeah, there's no persistent storage for less.
At the moment, everything is running inside /Antidote.
Yep. Yeah. So one idea that we had when we were talking about potentially adding some sort of an editor to the front end. Let me see if I can find it, because I'm pretty sure we added a general proposal for this, just never did anything with it. Was adding effectively a shared volume. So instead of, because right now /antidote, if you go into any endpoint, /antidote is unique to that endpoint. It's not shared. So if you make a change in one endpoint in that directory, it's not shared amongst the other endpoints. So I think
a copy on write.
Say again.
It's a copy on write.
Right. Yeah.
So there's part that is shared, but not in write mode. You can distribute stuff for them, but they cannot share.
Yeah. So I think that'll probably be necessary is adding a volume, and this shouldn't be that hard to do, to be honest. Adding a volume for that all endpoints can share. We got to figure out how to figure out. We got to figure out how to manage things like write contention and whatnot. I haven't thought about that too much. but I'm sure that's a solvable problem. We'll see. And maybe it's only writable from the editor, because we'll have to add an endpoint for the editor, I would expect. So we'll make it writable from that, and then not from anything else. I don't know. We'll see. That's something to work out what I would like to do is open a discussion in like a forum post or a pull request or an issue where we talk through the architecture. I think that's probably the first step. But a shared directory will probably be needed. Now, in terms of the longevity of that directory, it really, I don't know. We have to see. We have to see how it works out. Like I said, this is something we need to hash out in an architectural discussion. But
that's why I asked my student to try and understand how Eclipse Che is doing. With this, obviously, it's also managing authentication for the users. And maybe I can imagine that maybe we could borrow the authentication part, like a directory, password checking stuff, plus workspaces on those shared directories. And instead of just launching a web IDE, we would launch endpoints connected to that in the same, how's it called? Not environment. The session of a user in Kubernetes. Oh, I can't remember the name.
Namespace?
The namespace, yeah. Thanks. So basically, every user could be authenticated, granted a namespace, and from that point on, it could be just the regular antidote, but in the background, we would have Eclipse Che or bits that are used by Eclipse Che, something like that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. I think. Like I said, I think the right thing to do probably is it sounds like your student is doing some sort of exploratory exercises, but basically once she's done with those, I think posting findings to either the forum or an issue or whatever it is, and we can kick it off from there, I think is a good thing. There's definitely options. There's definitely plenty of ways we could do that. The only thing I'm wondering about is what's the right model in terms of like long-term persistence, because right now there's not really a strong guarantee that a user is going to get into the same environment that they were in from the beginning. In general, the session ID is supposed to give some persistence, but not long-term persistence. It's mostly meant to get you back into the same lesson that's already running. Once it's cleaned up, that guarantee is kind of gone. So we might have to make changes to accommodate more long-term sort of things. One idea that I also had was, instead of persistently storing things for a long time in the background, maybe we could provide effectively a button that you can click. Once you're done with your lesson, you can click a button and it allows you to download all of the files that you changed to your local system, and that way you handle it yourself. I don't know. There's plenty of options there, none of which are set in stone. So I think, like I said, the first step is to open an architectural discussion where I first off, I can learn more about what she found about the tool, the Che tool, and also I can fill in any gaps with respect to Antidote, especially given all of the changes that are happening right now. So
yeah, that's the path I had in mind too. I advise her to go and give hints or ask questions, but we're not there yet because she's struggling with Minikube errors, or the usual stuff when you're learning Kubernetes.
Yeah, no worries. I'll be here when she wants to, make a post, and we can go through some of the details.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
No, I don't think so. My kids and my wife are struggling in the back. I don't know if you heard some screaming.
No, I didn't. But to be honest, I might have just ignored it because it might have sounded like screaming on my end. So
okay.
It's possible we just sort of All right. Well, you stay safe, and yeah, like let me know how I
You
can
too.
help.
And see you next week.
Yep, sounds good. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.